The National News Desk, locally covered, nationally connected.
This person who dedicated her life to combat anti-Semitism was killed by a bigot anti-Semite.
A tragedy in our nation's capital after the murder of 2 Israeli embassy staffers, the response being felt across the globe.
That health alert notice would have told physicians, hey, be on the lookout for this because this is happening.
Failure to warn. A new report claims the federal government knew and downplayed the risks of COVID-19 mRNA vaccines. The health risks some doctors say weren't properly communicated. And a surge of Texas parents now stepping up their vaccine efforts. The rates now dramatically increasing following a deadly outbreak. From the nation's capital, this is the National News Desk, America's News Now. Thank you for joining us. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and on this weekend edition, we take a look at the big headlines of the week, and we look ahead at what to expect, starting with the 4 big stories we've been following this week. A judge blocks the Trump administration's effort to shrink the Department of Education. President Biden diagnosed with prostate cancer. More infighting from Democrats, and what's next for Trump's big, beautiful bill. But first, new developments: 2 dead after a shooting outside the Capitol Jewish Museum here in Washington, D.C. National correspondent Kayla Gaskins shares reaction from one of the victims' friends.
He came to kill Jewish people.
The suspect leaving little doubt to his motive, yelling this as police took him away in handcuffs.
Free Palestine!
Sarah Milgram's friend and colleague Ayelet Razin tells us Sarah, an American, decided to work at the Israeli embassy to help fight the rising anti-Semitism she felt as a Jew in the U.S. after Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel.
Peace-loving Sarah, dedicated, devoted Sarah. And, you know, it's the irony, it's just unbearable. This person who dedicated her life to combat anti-Semitism was killed by a bigot anti-Semite.
After Wednesday's attack, one of President Trump's first calls was to Attorney General Pam Bondi, who handed the phone to Israel's ambassador to the U.S., Michael Leiter.
Who told me that his administration is going to do everything it can possibly do to fight and end anti-Semitism.
Pro-Palestine Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar refused to comment on the deaths.
Can I get your reaction to the shooting that happened in D.C. last night?
I'm going to go for now.
Much of the focus on rising anti-Semitism has come from the protests on college campuses like Columbia University that some argue have veered clearly into anti-Semitic territory.
It's chilling because those are the same chants that we've been hearing on college campuses and in city streets. That kind of language, those kinds of protests were, of course, taken seriously by the Jewish community, by law enforcement, but not to now considered to be sources of potential violence.
These concerns led to the arrest of Columbia student activist Mahmoud Khalil by immigration authorities. The Justice Department arguing Khalil spread Hamas propaganda on campus. The incident dominated Columbia's graduation ceremonies this week.
And new developments: the nation's first religious charter school in Oklahoma will not be opening. A 4-4 tie vote at the Supreme Court effectively dooms the state's proposal to launch taxpayer-funded St. Isidore of Seville Catholic Virtual School. This all means the Oklahoma Supreme Court's ruling that the idea is unconstitutional will stand.
Religious liberty is preserved in the state of Oklahoma. Parents can teach their children the faith of their fathers and mothers. And schools can teach, let's hope, reading competency, math competency, science, and social studies.
Evenly split decisions do not set precedent, allowing religious groups involved in the case to bring another case. Charter schools are privately run but supported by public funds, serving nearly 4 million students in the U.S. The Education Department will remain in operation for the time being. A federal judge has blocked President Trump's executive order that calls for its dismantling. The judge also orders the agency to reinstate employees who were fired during mass layoffs in March. The judge says the scale of the layoffs would likely cripple the department. The Trump administration wants to end police reform agreements in 2 cities. The Justice Department has taken action to drop consent decrees in Louisville and Minneapolis. Those went into place following the police shooting death of Breonna Taylor and officer killing of George Floyd. Consent decrees are federal judge-approved agreements used to monitor police departments after reform is deemed necessary. The deaths of Taylor and Floyd both sparked national calls for change. The 2021 U.S. military withdrawal from Afghanistan will be reinvestigated. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said he's creating a special panel that will conduct a comprehensive review and look at previous investigations. The ISIS bombing at Abbey Gate outside the airport in Kabul left 13 U.S. troops and 170 civilians dead. There's been a military review every year since the botched evacuation. Even though supplies are finally being let into the Gaza Strip, Israel is taking a while to green light aid groups access to it.
Only then are we able to bring any supplies closer to where people in need are sheltering.
Humanitarian groups say the Israeli military forced them to reload supplies onto separate trucks and took several hours to allow them to collect the aid from the border crossing. Workers essentially ran out of time to get aid to their distribution points. The action received condemnation from the international community, including the U.S.
I believe they can achieve their objective of defeating Hamas while still allowing aid to enter in sufficient quantities.
And millions of Palestinians in the suffering enclave are on the brink of famine. A federal judge striking down regulations requiring most U.S. employers to provide workers accommodations like time off after having an abortion. The ruling comes as the Trump administration has moved to impose widespread changes at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission that will almost certainly lead the agency to eventually rewrite the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act regulation. And a health alert, more babies are now getting vaccinated against the measles in Texas as the outbreak there continues to grow. That's according to healthcare and analytics company Truvada. The percentage of 6-month-old babies getting vaccinated last month increased over 30 times last year's average. That is the earliest children can get their first dose. There are 722 confirmed measles cases in Texas. The CDC reports over 1,000 cases nationwide. And an explosive new report from the Senate Homeland Security Committee accuses the federal government and Biden administration of failing to warn the American people and the world about potential side effects from the COVID-19 mRNA vaccine. 5 years after the outbreak, and some doctors say the signs were there and they were deliberately ignored due to fears making them public would increase vaccine hesitancy. National correspondent Christine Frizzell sat down with one of the doctors who testified on Capitol Hill and has this report.
Literally, the job of the FDA, the job of the CDC, is to actually regulate our products and inform practitioners and people about the dangers that they might see as soon as they see them.
It was a job Dr. Jordan Vaughn says was not done, sounding alarm bells to lawmakers on Capitol Hill about a decision by public health officials in 2021 to not use what's known as a Health Alert Network message, or HAN, when increased risks from the COVID-19 vaccine became more clear.
That health alert notice would have told physicians, hey, be on the lookout for this because this is happening.
What was happening is the focus of an investigation by a Senate Homeland Security subcommittee, which details in a brand new report how federal health agencies downplayed risks from the COVID-19 vaccine and failed to warn the American people, accusing the Biden administration of downplaying and delaying warning the public about the risks of myocarditis associated with the mRNA COVID-19 vaccine. Cases of this inflammation of the heart muscle became especially prevalent in young men, aged 12 to 39 years old, according to the American Heart Association. The highest risk following the second dose of both the Pfizer and Moderna mRNA vaccines.
When we're talking about children or young men that have myocarditis, once cardiac muscle is destroyed, you're in for a long, hard life because you're not going to get new cardiac muscle.
Democrats on the committee do not support claims that public health officials knowingly kept information hidden from the public.
As we talk about the side effects of COVID vaccines, I think we need to be clear about the most important fact for all Americans. COVID COVID-19 vaccines have saved millions and millions of lives.
This report released just one day after the new FDA commissioner changed the rules for COVID-19 vaccine booster shots, limiting access only to those over 65 years old or with underlying health conditions. I'm Christine Frizzell for the National News Desk.
As the popularity of weight loss drugs surge, so do concerns about affordability and insurance coverage. Janae Bowens from the Fact Check team joining us now. So as we've covered, it is my understanding that some of these weight loss drugs can actually be less expensive outside of the U.S.
Exactly, Dee Dee. So specifically Wegovy, it's a GLP-1 weight loss medication made by Novo Nordisk. Now it's listed at $1,349 in the U.S., but in the U.K. it costs just $92, and that's according to USA Today.
Yeah, quite a difference. Yeah. Why are they more expensive? I mean, what's driving up these prices?
Yeah, so it's somewhat multifaceted, but what it really comes down to that unlike other countries, the U.S. doesn't have a centralized system for price negotiation, which allows manufacturers to set prices based on market demand. Now, there are other factors like patent protections, complex manufacturing, pharmacy middlemen, and limited insurance coverage that all drive the prices up.
So popular, so there's a lot of interest here. Janae, thank you. Later on, Janae's going to be back to break down President Trump's executive order that aims to lower these types of prescription drug prices and make sure Americans are paying a fair amount for them. Coming up next, Dems in disarray, the impact of infighting on the midterms, plus tuberculosis detected at a New York high school. The testing happening now and the symptoms you need to know. As President Trump's tax bill comes together, House Republicans are busy defending one key proposal, one that bans states from regulating AI for 10 years. At a hearing this week, GOP lawmakers argued allowing states to put together a patchwork system would stifle innovation and threaten national security. But analysts warn that federal efforts are at a standstill. With breakthroughs in the industry happening every day, the risks of not putting guardrails around the tech could be catastrophic. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has accepted the controversial Boeing 747 jet from Qatar for President Trump to use as Air Force One. A Pentagon spokesperson says the department will begin work to ensure the jet has proper security measures for presidential use. They say the plane was accepted in accordance with all federal rules and regulations. Critics say it's an improper gift. And Democrats may turn out to be their own worst enemies. In the last several days, high-profile party leaders making comments that risk alienating voters, just as the party's moderate wing attempts to reboot after losing the presidential election. The National News Desk's Angelo Brown explains.
Was this Hillary Clinton's deplorables moment part two?
First of all, don't be a handmaiden to the patriarchy. Which kind of eliminates every woman on the other side of the aisle, except for very few.
The former secretary taking a sharp dig at Republican women this month. Voters Democrats may need to win the White House again.
There definitely is a problem with their messaging, and they really have to fix it now.
Some Democratic leaders appear to be taking that warning seriously. This week's Time magazine article exposing what some Democrats are saying behind closed doors. They largely agree they need to recenter economic issues in their messaging and develop what some are calling a patriotic populism to counter Trump. Many moderate Democrats want to sideline activist groups that pressured elected officials to take unpopular positions, end quote. Political scientist Dr. Sharon Austin says many voters now associate the Democratic Party with identity politics before economic issues.
They feel that the Democratic Party, is only for promoting the issues of concern to people of color, to gay people, to trans people, and the white working class feels that they are being neglected.
Independent Senator Bernie Sanders has criticized Democrats in the past about focusing too much on identity politics, and this week he didn't hold back.
And then you get to what we call identity politics. Yeah. You're black, you're wonderful, you're tremendous, you're gay, you're the greatest human being on earth.
Yeah.
And rather than say, what do you stand for?
Democrats have a deep hole to dig out of. The Associated Press Nork Center for Public Affairs research found that only about 1/3 of Democrats are very optimistic or even somewhat optimistic about their party's future. In Washington, D.C., I'm Angela Brown.
Senator Bernie Sanders says the Democratic Party is a threat to democracy. The Vermont Independent agreeing with comedians Andrew Schultz and Akash Singh on the Flagrant podcast that aired Monday.
Could we not also say if ostensibly there hasn't been a fair primary for the Democrats since 2008, are they not also a threat to democracy? Yes. We often hear.
Fair enough. That is, yeah, I'm not going to argue with that point. And that's why I'm proudly an independent.
Senator Sanders has been touring the country with Democratic Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez for their Fighting Oligarchy tour, which has drawn crowds. An update in the years-long legal battle over the admissions process at a Virginia high school. Virginia's Attorney General now says Fairfax County Public Schools is in violation of the Virginia Human Rights Act and Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 by discriminating against Asian American students in the admissions process at the school.
Let me be clear. Discrimination is wrong. And when that discrimination comes from those entrusted to educate our children and uphold the law, it is especially troubling.
This comes after FCPS changed admissions procedures for the school in 2020, got rid of standardized testing requirements, and altered other minimum requirements to apply. Miata has said he is referring the matter to the U.S. Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Justice for further enforcement under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. This week, President Donald Trump signed a law which criminalizes the sharing of non-consensual explicit deepfakes. Those are images in which a person's face is superimposed on a nude body using artificial intelligence. This law will boost protections for victims of revenge porn, increase accountability for the tech platforms where they are shared, and give law enforcement clarity about how to prosecute the activity. A New York high school on edge after a student tested positive for tuberculosis last week. So far, Sachem High School East on Long Island says there's been no other confirmed cases. Health officials are now monitoring more than 100 students and staff who might have been exposed to the deadly disease, with testing being offered. Parents are also demanding more information on what is being done to protect people at the school. Another round of cucumbers is being recalled in the wake of a salmonella outbreak that has sickened 26 people across 15 states. This recall is for the 5-pound mesh bags of whole cucumbers with Restaurant Depot and Penrose Farms logos printed on them. They were packaged between May 2nd and May 5th. Consumers are being urged to throw them out. Still to come, a battle brewing between a city and small business owners. The new regulations that could put over 40 shops out of business and preventing another wildfire disaster. The signs officials say to look out for this Memorial Day weekend. This is the National News Desk, America's News Now. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering issues that matter to you. And we start in Cincinnati, Ohio, where lawmakers are using the tragic death of an officer to inspire new laws to protect law enforcement.
It isn't just a tragic death, it's a tragic death of somebody who gave their life in service of the people of Hamilton County. So look, this inspired me to put together this bill.
The Larry Henderson Act would increase the mandatory minimum prison sentence to 20 years for anyone convicted of assaulting a federal officer.
I had the privilege of going to the funeral. I saw the incredible show of support from his fellow law enforcement officers, heard over and over again that of all the people for this to happen to, Larry Henderson was just a good man.
It would also make it a federal crime, moving the case into a federal court.
Put it in the federal court system to make certain that we absolutely make it clear that this is a different category crime, that if you were to harm a law enforcement officer, you would face the severest consequences possible.
City Council has a roadmap to go after bad actor smoke shops.
We don't understand why they're following this bad solution, because it's not going to achieve the policy goal that they want.
The Smoke Shop Association has now filed a lawsuit against the city of Fresno over the recently passed smoke shop ordinance. One of the lawsuit's main claims is that the city capped the number of smoke shops at 49, even though more than 80 are already legally operating. The ordinance also imposes strict rules on smoke shops that don't apply to other tobacco retailers, like grocery stores or gas stations.
33 smoke shops are going to be put out of business by this ordinance, regardless of how well they run their smoke shop. That's not targeted at bad actors like the city says.
The lawsuit argues it's unfair that only a small group of tobacco sellers' smoke shops are being targeted while the majority are exempt.
As people drive north, they'll probably see scattered smoky signs throughout the area. That indicates fire danger, says burning permits are required. Those are a good first step to kind of just see what those conditions are out there.
It's already been an active fire season, even by spring standards. Spring is peak season for fires in Wisconsin, but this year there have been about 300 more fires than usual through this time of year, and more than twice the number of fires bigger than 5 acres. There were even 6 more fires just reported by Tuesday afternoon alone. Even with Tuesday's rain, it might take a bit for fire danger in the sandy soil northwoods to abate.
That green up really hasn't started to fully peak yet, so conditions are still relatively dry.
Coming out, changing the way you charge. The popular airline that now wants some of your electronics in plain sight. And breaking news, literally, for this morning TV anchor, the New York News team now welcoming its newest member of the family. Taking a look at the top trending stories on our website right now. Well, it was a morning show to remember for our sister station WRGB in New York. Anchor Olivia Jaquith went into labor just before the newscast began, anchoring the entire show before going to the hospital. Congratulations. Rapper and actor Kid Cudi took the stand on Thursday in Sean Diddy Combs' sex trafficking trial. He testified that Diddy set his car on fire while he was dating his now ex, Cassie Ventura. And a Jacksonville, Florida woman has become the 10th winner in her area to win the same $1 million prize scratch-off game. Those stories and more available right now at thenationaldesk.com. Sales now expected to continue to fall at Target for the rest of the year. The company's CEO reporting sales for the first quarter didn't meet expectations. Target says recent customer boycotts over the company's DEI rollbacks was one of several factors that impacted sales. The company is taking steps to manage tariff impacts, but claims that price increases would be a last resort. And the Justice Department is opening an investigation into a cyber attack targeting Coinbase Global. It is the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange. We are told the DOJ is focusing on those responsible for the attack, not Coinbase. The company says the attackers stole data, including names of customers, addresses, and emails, but they did not access login information or passwords. Travelers will soon need to carry their portable chargers in plain sight. Southwest Airlines rolling out their new policy. Starting next week, Southwest will be the first U.S. airline to restrict portable charger use. There is growing concern about lithium-ion battery fires on planes. There have been 19 incidents so far this year. The FAA reports 89 fires in 2024. Coming up, a targeted anti-Semitic attack right here in Washington, D.C. The families and community impacted as calls for more protections for the Jewish community increase worldwide. You're watching the National News Desk, America's News Now. You can catch us live weekdays from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time, and anytime online at thenationaldesk.com. We'll be right back. The National News Desk, locally covered, nationally connected. Coming up, the big, beautiful bill passes the House. What's in it that some are calling nation-shaping? And House Republicans are pushing for transparency after Biden reveals his cancer diagnosis, what they now want from some of the former president's staffers.
This is pure anti-Semitism and hate murders directed against Jews themselves.
Breaking down the horrific D.C. attack, lawyer and former Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz joins us to discuss the rise in anti-Semitism across the U.S. From the nation's capital, this is the National News Desk, America's News Now. I'm Dee Dee Gatton. Thank you for joining us. And after weeks of wrangling, House Republicans passed their big, beautiful bill, a budget resolution full of the president's priorities. National correspondent Matt Gelka reports from Washington on what's in the bill and what's next.
Today, the House has passed generational, truly nation-shaping legislation.
House Republican leadership took a victory lap after the chamber passed the big, beautiful bill by one vote.
The bill is passed.
House Speaker Mike Johnson delivered on the goal to get something passed by Memorial Day, but getting to this point was anything but smooth. Johnson, along with the help of the president, was able to unite different factions of Republicans opposed to various sticking points in the bill.
Take this as a lesson. Don't bet against the House Republicans.
The bill includes a number of Trump and GOP priorities, including nearly $4 trillion in tax cuts, a majority of that taken up by extending the tax cuts from Trump's first term. It also includes no taxes on tips or overtime, a campaign promise from the president. There's billions for defense spending and southern border money while rolling back Biden-era green energy tax credits. The bill changes SNAP benefits and Medicaid by mandating work requirements for both programs. Work requirements for Medicaid would start at the end of 2026, and a large number of people could be kicked off of both programs.
We should have work requirements for all welfare programs, able-bodied people, not people in wheelchairs or people who are unable to work. And we should have had those yesterday.
Democrats will likely use the bill early and often out on the campaign trail heading into the 2026 midterms.
The GOP tax scam represents an assault on the economy, an assault on health care, an assault on nutritional assistance, an assault on tax fairness, and an assault on fiscal responsibility.
The bill is still far from becoming a law. Over in the Senate, a handful of Republican senators have already signaled they're uneasy about Medicaid cuts. On Truth Social, the president praised the House's work and told the Senate to get to work and send the bill to him as soon as possible. Reporting in Washington, I'm Matt Gelka for the National News Desk, America's News Now.
Russia is getting slapped with new sanctions as peace talks with Ukraine fail to produce any meaningful results. The European Union is targeting nearly 200 Russian ships illicitly transporting oil to skirt Western restrictions. The 27-nation bloc is also imposing asset freezes and travel bans on several Russian officials and companies. Work on this package began months ago, but the United Kingdom is joining in on the sanctions, and both the EU and UK condemn the inability to reach a ceasefire. While President Trump remains optimistic about a deal, he still had this to say.
Big egos involved, but I think something's going to happen. And if it doesn't, I'd just back away and they're going to have to keep going. Again, this was a European situation.
Trump has threatened to ramp up sanctions and tariffs on Russia, but has yet to make any moves. A somber tradition at Arlington National Cemetery honors America's fallen heroes ahead of Memorial Day. The 77-year-old tradition called Flags In is where active servicemen and women from across the country place American flags in front of every grave in the cemetery. This year, over 400,000 flags will be seen across the ground for service members and their families. Our coverage continues following the deadly shooting in our nation's capital. 2 Israeli embassy staffers killed while leaving an event on Wednesday. Joining me earlier this week to discuss, lawyer and former Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz. Alan, we know that the alleged suspect here is in police custody right now. He was taken away from the scene and was heard shouting, "Free, free Palestine." With the recent rise in protesting across college campuses related to the Israel-Hamas war, how do you think we got here?
Well, first of all, let's remember that the killer, the murderer, didn't know that these folks worked for Israel, the Israeli embassy. They were killed because they were Jews coming out of a Jewish museum regarding a Jewish event focusing on human rights. So this is pure anti-Semitism and hate murders directed against Jews themselves. How we got here is through the violent protests, and so it was inevitable that the kinds of protests we saw on campuses with harassment, with beatings, with holding people against their will would inevitably lead to murders. And there are going to be more murders. And it all grows out of these campus events that have occurred over the last almost 2 years.
Alan, you mentioned peace, and it is so sad because that is how this event started, discussions over peace. You know, since this suspect has been charged with federal crimes that carry the possibility of the death penalty, do you think the Justice Department will pursue that?
Yes, I think they will. I think they should. I'm strongly opposed to the death penalty, but if you have a death penalty, it certainly applies to a case like this. This has to be a very thorough investigation.
Yeah, speaking of investigation, and we know that possible terror ties, that is going to be a big part of that. As we look at this, Alan, from a national security angle, in your opinion, is this about who comes into the country, or is this a societal issue? We understand that the suspect, authorities are saying he came from Chicago.
Yeah, it's both. Obviously, we have homegrown terrorists, homegrown murderers, but we also have people coming in from outside. And when you hear people saying globalize the Intifada, that means kill. The Intifada killed 4,000 people after Israel offered the Palestinians a state on 96% of the West Bank, 4% of Israel, 100% of the Gaza Strip. The response was an Intifada in which 4,000 people were killed. And when people yell globalize the Intifada, it's not even a code word. It's a direct incitement to go and kill Jews.
As you talk about what is going on internationally, it is so important to remember that this attack fits into a larger narrative of rising violence and rising tensions globally.
No, you're absolutely right. This is a global problem, and it's going to get worse. That's my prediction. It's going to get worse.
We appreciate your time and your insight tonight.
Thank you.
New details on the alleged cover-up of former President Biden's declining health while he was in office. House Oversight Chairman James Comer has requested interviews with Biden's physician and key aides. The letters sent to Biden's team come as Comer specifically plans to zero in on Biden's use of the AutoPen, a device used for automatic signatures. The White House believes it wasn't Biden running the government, but the people around him.
President Trump says that he basically thinks unelected Biden staffers concealed his decline so that they could use the levers of power for their own personal gain.
Look, that's not just the president thinking that, Peter. There's a new book out. I don't know if any of you have heard about it. Again, a little bit too late because the American people knew the truth on this from the very beginning. And there were reporters in this room, including some from your network, Peter. I'll give you a little bit of credit here, who have said that clearly Joe Biden's staffers were engaging in this cover-up.
Leavitt was also asked about the possible de-escalation or declassification of documents related to Biden's health and said she would ask Trump if he intends to do so. President Trump is cracking down on expensive weight loss drugs with an executive order mandating pharmaceutical companies to reduce their prices. Janae Bowens from the Fact Check team joining us now to discuss, and I know you dug into the executive order. Lay that down for us.
Yeah, Dee Dee. So the order basically says if countries like the UK or Germany are paying way less for the same drugs, so should we. Now, drug companies have 30 days to drop their prices to match those lower international rates or risk penalties like tariffs or export bans. And there's a reason this is happening now. Americans are paying more than $1,000 a month for these drugs, while in some countries they cost under $100.
That is a massive gap. I know it goes without saying. How are drug companies responding?
Yeah, so the two main players, that's Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, say They're open to working with the government, but they also point to middlemen in the healthcare system, like pharmacy benefit managers, as part of why prices are so high. In the meantime, both companies have started offering their drugs at a discounted price, about $4.99 a month if you pay out of pocket.
All right, Janae, thank you. Much more on this online. Visit our website, thenationaldesk.com, or scan the QR code on your screen for links to their sources. So to come, our team of correspondents breaks down this week in Washington, from the bombshell COVID vaccine report to the latest on the big, beautiful budget bill.
And welcome back to the National News Desk. Our Washington Bureau covers the nation's capital every day, and our team of correspondents reports on the important issues facing the country and how they impact you. 2 Israeli embassy staffers shot and killed outside a Jewish museum in Washington, D.C. this past week. The alleged shooter shouting "Free Palestine" as he was being taken into custody. National correspondent Kayla Gaskins, you've been covering anti-Israel protests across the U.S. since the October 7th, 2023 Hamas terror attack on Israel. What are people in the Jewish community saying about the rhetoric at these protests and the shooting here in D.C.?
Well, Steve, they're saying as heartbreaking as this shooting was, as much of a tragedy the deaths have been for the Jewish community, they're not surprised. This is what they've been attempting to sound the alarm about. This is what they've been warning about for months, if not, we're getting to the point where we're talking about this in years now, since the October 7th attack on Israel and since these protests have popped up in the United States, and they remain persistent. And what the people in the Jewish community really want to make clear, the ones that I've spoken to, it's not the free speech aspect of it. It's a very fine line between being pro-Palestine and then the chants that they find concerning are the ones like Intifada, that historically calls for violence against the Jewish people, and From the River to the Sea, which the Jewish community interprets as completely eradicating the state of Israel altogether. And they say that these chants are not just benign, they're not undangerous, that they actually do lead to violence, and that's the violence that we saw that ended in 2 deaths this past week. Now, I spoke to a woman who's friends with Sarah Milgram, the one who died this past week, and she said that Sarah, who's an American, she's from Kansas, but she could feel the rising anti-Semitism around her, a feeling she didn't have before October 7th, and that in part inspired her to go work for the Israeli embassy here in Washington, D.C. to fight anti-Semitism around the world. Here's what she had to say.
Peace-loving Sarah, dedicated, devoted Sarah. The irony, it's just unbearable. This person who dedicated her life to combat anti-Semitism was killed by a bigot anti-Semite.
And she says if there's any silver lining to Sarah's death, it's that it will bring attention to the fact that, yes, these chants are in fact dangerous. They do lead to violence. And we had a prime example of that this past week, Steve.
Right, and it's been a priority for the administration and President Trump to deal with this anti-Semitic issue, and I'm sure we'll be hearing more about this moving forward. Kayla, thank you. Meanwhile, President Trump's, quote, big, beautiful tax cuts and spending bill cleared a significant hurdle.
Today, the House has passed generational, truly nation-shaping legislation.
National correspondent Matt Galka. House Republicans taking a victory lap Thursday for passing the bill. What's in it, and where does it go from here?
Yeah, Steve, the big, beautiful bill for a while was a big pain in the, well, I'll let you finish the end of it. I mean, it was not smooth sailing for Republicans to get to this point. Let's talk about what is in the bill. So a lot of money for defense, a lot of money for the southern border. They're rolling back some Biden-era green energy tax credits, and there have tax cuts of their own. A large majority of that, about $4 trillion of that, is extending the Trump-era tax cuts from his first term back in 2017. But he also has, or the bill also has, no taxes on tips and no taxes on Social Security. Those were campaign promises from President Trump when he was on the campaign trail. So a lot of the president's domestic agenda is included in this bill. And you heard Speaker Mike Johnson there talking about how impactful he believes believes it is, how generational he believes the bill could be. And that very well could be the case. Although saying that right now might be a little premature also, because this bill still has a long way to go until it becomes a law. The Senate, obviously, they're going to make their own changes. And a lot of Republican senators have already signaled and actually, before I even get to that point, part of the bill includes cuts to Medicaid. They include work requirements for Medicaid and SNAP, both those welfare programs. So Republican senators have already said they're a little uneasy with some of the cuts to Medicaid and perhaps some of the work requirements that could kick a not so insignificant number of people off of that program. So the Senate is going to craft their version of the bill or make changes to this bill. They're going to have to send it back to the House. And so we might be in for another rocky road here. A lot of negotiations still yet to go. Meanwhile, Democrats, who don't really have a lot of power in Congress, what they're going to do from probably this day forward until the midterm elections is hammer away at the things they did not like in this bill, things like those Medicaid cuts as they soldier on to 2026. So still a long way to go for this one, but at least if you're a House Republican this weekend, you're pretty happy that you were able to get across the finish line to begin with.
Yep, you said it, a lot of work to do before this hits the president's desk for his signature. Matt, thank you. Meanwhile, an explosive new report from the Senate Homeland Security Committee accuses the federal government of failing to warn the American people and the world about potential side effects from the COVID mRNA vaccine.
Literally, the job of the FDA, the job of the CDC, is to actually regulate our products and inform practitioners and people about the dangers that they might see as soon as they see them.
National correspondent Christine Frizzell, you sat down with Dr. Vaughn, who testified on Capitol Hill about this on Wednesday. What else did he tell you?
Yeah, well, Steve, remember, during the height of the pandemic, once the vaccine was available, anyone who said anything at all negative about it was shunned and in some cases silenced on social media. So Dr. Vaughn sat down with me before he went to testify on the Hill. He was one of many people to sound alarm bells about what he was seeing in some of his patients, particularly young men. And that is something known as myocarditis. That's the inflammation of the heart muscle in a way he says permanently weakens that muscle. And it was most prevalent after those young men took the second dose of the COVID mRNA vaccine, particularly the Pfizer and Moderna shots. Now, he says, you know, these warnings were mounting and they were going to where they should, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And instead of using a Health Alert Network warning or HAN warning, he says they sort of just quietly updated the website out of concern that that information would lead to vaccine hesitancy. At a time, public health officials were really just trying to get as many people vaccinated as possible. So this report, you know, he contributed to the research in this report, and it basically says they failed to warn. Now, the hearing on the Hill this past week laid out the details, but also had many Democrats reminding people just how valuable the vaccine was. Most Democrats disagree with this notion there was a failure. They argue instead, you know, these public health officials just wanted to better understand the information before they put it out there.
5 years later, the fallout from the pandemic, still we're facing it. Christine, Matt, Kayla, as always, thanks for your hard work. Back to you.
Subaru now increasing the price on several vehicle models. The change will begin next month as the Japanese company cited current market conditions for their decision. Subaru said these changes were made to offset increasing costs while preserving value. The company added that pricing is not based on the origin country of its products. Coming up next, grading on a different kind of curve. The new technology some schools are turning to that's raising some concerns. Plus, an ICE raid leads to the arrest of dozens of immigrants. That and more coming up in 90 seconds. This is the National News Desk, America's News Now. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering issues that matter to you. And we start near Seattle, Washington, where ICE made 17 arrests at a local business.
All witnesses could do was stand back and record.
Hey, no firmen nada. Pídanlo a los abogados.
as ICE agents escorted people into this bus. ICE tells us they were executing a federal search warrant for employment violations at the Eagle Beverage Products facility in Kent.
We don't know where they took her.
We had hoped to hear if the company had any sort of response to the allegations here by ICE. An employee here told me today they didn't have any comment, and I didn't hear back when I emailed the company. This is the latest workplace raid in Washington since the Trump administration ramped up immigration enforcement. A raid in Bellingham in April led to 37 people being detained.
We have found that it is very robotic in its grading because it's an AI, and it doesn't want any personalities.
A group of West Claremont 8th graders have been researching how AI evaluates students' essays on state exams and how it impacts their grade. Their investigation found while it catches grammatical mistakes and likes big words, it doesn't always take into account creativity and personality. Teacher Mary Hufford says they taught students how to write specifically for the grading of these state tests. She says 84% of students saw growth in their writing portion this year.
When we're teaching people how to write, we want them to write for a variety of audiences and purposes. We don't want to teach students just to write to please a computer.
The students recently met with State Representative Adam Byrd to present their findings.
Well, I think the evidence that they present is compelling and it needs to be heard. I think that Ohio needs to seriously consider a change.
Students are scheduled to meet with members of the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce over Zoom Thursday.
What are you hoping comes out of their research and the conversation tomorrow with the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce?
Change. I really would like to see the state reevaluate its assessment system.
The field that we had ready to plant strawberries on washed away. When I say washed away, I don't mean it just went over it. I mean it washed 4 feet of topsoil off of 17 acres.
What you're seeing on screen are pictures of Scott's strawberry field taken at the same spot before and after the flood.
For a couple of days, I really didn't know what to do or how to do it. But everybody in the family, we all work together, the guys, the farm.
Even though this year has been tough, it's loyal customers like Lucinda Floden who keep it alive.
It's a local business that I support, and I love that they're here. And after all the rain and everything that happened last year, I'm going to have to buy more strawberries.
Still ahead here, passing the buck. Retailers feeling the squeeze from the tariffs, passing on those extra costs to consumers. The home improvement store now saying their prices won't be impacted by the trade war. Looking ahead, Nike says it's raising prices on apparel, equipment, and shoes by June 1st. Shoes priced between $100 and $150 could see up to a 5% increase in price. Nike also returning to Amazon after pulling its products in 2019 to focus on sales through its website. The company didn't cite tariffs as the reason for the changes, but said it's a part of their seasonal planning. Home Depot holding firm. The hardware giant now says they plan to keep costs low, despite other retailers like Walmart warning about passing tariff costs on to consumers. Executives insisting that its customers will not see broad price increases, but the tariffs may raise prices on select items or take some items off the shelf. More than half of Home Depot's inventory comes from within the U.S. And that'll be all for us on the weekend edition of the National News Desk, America's News Now. Don't forget, you can catch us live from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. Check your local listings, and you can also watch us online and catch up with the latest headlines on thenationaldesk.com. Thanks for watching the weekend edition of the National News Desk. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and from all of us here, have a great week.